What's up everyone, welcome back. So in the previous video we looked at how we can build a simple web server using FastAPI, and we also explored the different ways in which we can build API endpoints using that simple web server. With that knowledge, we are going to come up with the CRUD REST API. So CRUD is simply an acronym for 4 functions that are involved whenever you are manipulating data in a data storage application. CRUD is simply create, read, update, and delete. So for creating, we are creating a resource on the back end. So think of a resource as any sort of data that is being provided by an API or data that we are trying to manipulate using our API. So in this case, we are going to be manipulating book data since we're going to be building a book review service. For reading, you are going to be fetching a resource from your backend. So this is a read operation that involves you having to go to the database side or to the data storage part and then picking up that specific resource that you are trying to get. For updating, you are updating a resource that exists on your backend and you are trying to modify it with new data that is coming from your client. Then for deleting, we are deleting a resource. So we are basically going to the backend and then having to delete or remove that specific resource from our backend. Then what is a resource? A resource is simply that data that an API provides or allows us to manipulate. So most of the cases, you may interact with an already existing API and that API is going to provide some sort of data. But sometimes you also go ahead and manipulate that kind of data by creating or deleting or modifying that specific data. Alright, so now that we've understood what CRUD is, let us go ahead and try to look at how we're going to implement the simple CRUD REST API. So right here is a simple table containing the different API endpoints, the HTTP methods that are going to be used, and the description for those specific HTTP methods or those specific endpoints. So the first one we have is going to be the /books endpoint, and what this is going to do is to allow us to fetch or get a list of all books from our data store. Now in this video we're going to be using a simple data store, which is an in-memory database, but we're going to look at how we can use a persistent data store such as a PostgreSQL database. The next endpoint is going to be one for making a post request to our /books endpoint. So this is going to involve us getting data from the client and then having to send that data to the server via a post request. The next one is going to be the book, the /book ID endpoint, and this is going to be one for updating a book on our backend. The reason as to why we are using a patch method is because by updating the book, we are not doing a full update to it. So we're going to be updating some of the fields that are going to be existing on a book. Finally, we have the /book ID, which is going to be accessed via the delete HTTP method that's going to allow us to delete a book on the backend. Alright, with that out of the way, let us get into building this simple CRUD API. Inside VS Code is a simple list of books that is going to act as our book database. So what we're going to do is to carry out CRUD, but on this simple in-memory database, which is the Python list. So what we're going to do is to first of all create our FastAPI instance, and I'll begin by importing our FastAPI class. I think I've made a mistake right here. It's going to be FastAPI. And once I've been able to do that, I'm going to simply create an instance of our FastAPI class. Once this has been done, then the next thing is going to be for us to create the API endpoints to carry out whatever we specified in the presentation. So I'm going to go right at the end of this list right here, and then we shall create our first API endpoint using app.get. Now keep in mind the HTTP methods we specified. So this is going to be on the /books endpoint. Let me make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see. And we're going to define the handler function for that as one for get all books. And we shall pass this for now. Now we're going to simply create the other endpoints and then we shall implement their logic one by one. So what I'll do is to go ahead and copy what we have here. This is going to be the same for the one for creating books, though the HTTP method will be post and then we shall have to also change the handler function to create a book. Notice that I'm giving very descriptive names for the actions that are being carried out by these path handler functions. So I'm going to do the same thing for getting a book. So I'll just come right here and say at app.get. So this is going to be slash books. Actually, it's going to be slash book and then slash the book ID, or the ID of the book that you're going to retrieve or get. So that's going to be slash book ID, and then we are going to define the handler function for that as get book. So notice that if you're trying to get a book, then this is going to be a path parameter. If you haven't checked out the previous video, we discussed how we can use path parameters. But when you define a parameter, just like we've defined for the book ID, then we shall also have to go ahead and provide it as our book ID in here. So this is going to be an integer for now, but we're going to look at how we can use UUIDs when you get to using a persistent database. So once we've defined our integer ID, then we're also going to define the return type. So let's say this is going to return a dictionary. Wonder why I haven't done it for the others. So let me go ahead and do that. So all these are going to return dictionaries. So this is going to return a list, and we're going to look at how we're going to implement it. So let me skip that for now. But this is going to return a dictionary. So I'll have to specify that this is going to return a dictionary, which is going to be our book that we've created. Then let us go ahead and do for the rest of the remaining endpoints. So we have now done create, read, update. So this is actually going to be create, read. So we have one for getting all books, we have one for retrieving a single book, updating a single book, and then deleting. So I'm going to copy what we have here, and this is going to be for get. So let this be for updating. So when updating, we are going to get the book data, but let's not focus on that for now. Let us go ahead and also name that for deleting a book. All right, so our API endpoints have been built. So let's go ahead and first of all deal with retrieving all books. So to get all books, all we're going to do is to simply return this book resource that we have here, or the books list that we have right here, which is our in-memory database of books. So I'm going to go ahead and simply say return, and in this case we're going to say return books, and that is going to be just enough to return our list of books. So if we pull up our server, so which is not actually running, so we have to go ahead and run it with FastAPI dev, and then I'll point to main.py. So our server is running. I'll head over to RESTFox, and then what I'm going to do in this case is to create a new folder where we're going to have all the endpoints that are going to be for our books. Now inside there is where I'm going to create our first request, and I'm going to call this get all books. So this is going to be one for getting a list of books. Now I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and once I've been able to do that, then I'm going to go and get our localhost 8000, paste it right there. So notice that our books are being accessed on the slash books endpoint. So when I go to slash books, in this case we shall get all our books just like you see them right here. So this is successfully working. So one thing that we haven't yet done is to specify the way in which we are returning these books, and this is where our pydantic models are going to come in. So in the previous video we talked of the request body and we talked of pydantic models, but we didn't discuss how we use these pydantic models to validate the data that is being returned from the API. So much as we have our data defined here, we also need to define the way in which the API is going to return this data. And that is done by providing a special attribute to this specific method, which is going to be the response model attribute. So let's go ahead and provide that. So I'll say response model, and our response model in this case is going to be the way we want to return our list of books. Now we're going to achieve this by first of all defining a data model for our books as they exist in the database. So let us go ahead and do that. So I'll begin by going to the top right here. So I'm going to make this smaller, and then I'll go ahead and import the base model class from Pydantic. So I'll say from Pydantic, we are going to go ahead and import our base model class. And once we've been able to do that, so I have a mistake right here, and let's go ahead and create our class for books. So this is going to be the one to define our books, and in this case this is going to inherit from our base model class. Once we've been able to do that, then let us look at the structure of a single book resource. So right here we have all these fields that belong to a book. I'm just simply going to come copy them right here, and then I'll go ahead and paste them right in our class. So I'm going to get rid of whatever we don't need. Alright, so now that I've been able to fix that, let me go ahead and now specify the types of whatever fields that we have on this model. So the first one is going to be our ID, and our IDs are integers, just like we see right here. So we're having most of the things being strings, but for the page count and the ID, we have integers. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply provide the right attributes for this. So I'll begin with the ID, which is going to be an integer. Our title is going to be a string, so I'll come right here and say that our title is going to be a string, and then our author in this case is going to be a string as well. Then we shall also have the same thing for our publisher, which is going to be a string. The published date is a string, so we are going to go ahead and also provide that as a string. Now let us go ahead and do the same thing for the page count, which is going to be an integer. And then our language is finally going to be a string. And now we have been able to create our Pydantic model. So once we've been able to define our Pydantic model, remember we're going to return a list of books. Now, for us to simply go ahead and provide our book right here, if we go ahead and save and return to making a request to that endpoint, we're going to see that we are having an error. And that error is going to arise from the fact that Pydantic is going to expect us to have a dictionary. Just like you see right here, the input should be a valid dictionary or object to extract fields from, but we have provided a list of items. So how can we be able to fix it? So to fix this, we are going to go ahead and make this a list of book model objects. So to do that, we are going to make use of the typing list class, and this is going to be one to allow us to create or define the return type of the list of books that we're going to return in this model. I'll go ahead and import that class from typing. So I'll say from typing, we are going to go ahead and import list class. And once we've been able to import it, then let us go ahead and specify that this is going to be a list of books. So once that is done, if all the fields have valid data for the data types we've defined right here and the extra validations that we can define, then we shall get a successful response. Else, we are going to go ahead and get errors for the validation errors. So when you go ahead and fetch our books, in this case, we shall see that our data is being returned successfully, and this is because we are defining our data according to the way the model is supposed to get and validate that data. So no validation errors are occurring. All right, so now that that is done, let us go ahead and deal with one to create a book. So to create a book, we expect that we're going to be sending data from our client, and this data is one that's going to be used through our serialization model to create a book on the back end. So to do that, we're going to come right here and inject in our book data. So this book data is going to be of type book, just like we have created. And once we have this book, we are simply going to go ahead and create a dictionary out of this book and then add that dictionary on top of the list that we have. So we're going to be using the special append method on our Python list. So I'm just going to come right here. So how are we going to convert this to a dictionary? We're going to simply going to do that our book, or we're going to say that our book is going to be, or let's just call this our new book. And our new book in this case is going to be one that's going to be created from the book data. So to access our book data as a dictionary, Pydantic allows us to access this via the model dump method. So the model dump method is one that's going to convert this book data object into a dictionary that we can finally add to our list. So to add this to our list, we're simply going to say books dot append, and in this case we are going to append our new book just like that. And once we've been able to do that, now let's go ahead and return the newly created book. So we shall say return new book, and that is going to be enough to add our book to our database or our in-memory database. All right, so once that is done, let us define the status code that's going to be for creating a new book successfully. So we're simply going to go at the top right here, and inside our HTTP method, we are going to add the status code attribute, and we're going to specify the status code for that response. So to do that, we're going to be making use of FastAPI's status module that gives us access to all these HTTP statuses. So I'll go at the top right here, and all I say is from FastAPI import status, but we already have FastAPI, so I'll just come right here and say status. And once that is done, then let us go ahead and simply say that from the status module, we are simply going to go ahead and access the HTTP 201 created status code. So from now on, I'm going to be accessing all status codes from the status module that FastAPI provides, and that is going to make it easy for us. So let us go ahead and test this. If we head back to where we make our request from, which is RESTFox, I'll create a new request, and I'm going to call this create book. So it's going to be create book, and I'm going to use the same URL different method, which is going to be our post method. So if we try to send, our body is going to be missing. Now remember, this is the work of Pydantic. It is sensing that we are not providing the request body, which is expects. So let us go ahead and provide that, and I'll go ahead and provide this as JSON. If we try to send this once again, our body is not being sent. So if we send blank fields, then we are going to get validation or validation data for those fields that are lacking. Now to cheat, I'm going to go ahead and just simply copy a random dictionary from here and use that to create our new object. So keep in mind that we are now hard coding our IDs. They are not automatically generated, but we shall look into how to do that when we reach the database section. So I'm going to simply go ahead and paste what we have right here, and then I'll go ahead and maybe let's say this is going to be our ID number 7. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and remove what we have here. So let me just call this think and grow rich, whatever that book is. Then here we're going to also have another book. Let me just change the author to John Doe. I'll change the publisher to whatever, and then change the date and change whatever field. So let's say the page count for this is going to be 200, and this is going to be, let's say, in English. So if we try to send, in this case we have a problem. So we are being told that the JSON here is invalid. Now let's see why this is happening. So I think it's because of this extra comma right here. If we send, we are now going to see that our book has been created, and this book has ID 7. So let us try to retrieve this book. So when you try to get all our books to confirm whether that book has been created, when you head over to our last items, we're going to see that our last item has been added to our database, which means that we've successfully created our book. Now that that has worked, let us go ahead and try to retrieve a single book from our data store. So to do that, we are simply going to go to our endpoint for getting a book. So this is going to take in the book ID. So for now, we're using a list, therefore we can go ahead and loop through the list. So I'll use a simple for loop for book in books, and then if a book matches that specific book ID that we provided, then we're going to return that book. Else, we're going to throw an error. So what we're going to do in this case is to use an if statement. So we're going to check if the book ID is the same as the ID of the book that we provided. So this is going to be our book ID. Then we are going to simply return that book. So I'll say return and then book. So once that is done, then let us go ahead and try to return an error in case that book has not been found. So I'll go outside the for loop and then I'll go ahead and return an error. So in this case, we are going to throw an exception. So in FastAPI, the way we throw an exception is by using the HTTP exception class. So I'll go ahead and import that. So we are simply going to go to the FastAPI exceptions module. And in there is where we're going to go ahead and import the HTTP exception class. So once we've been able to import that HTTP exception class, let us use it to raise an exception. So we're simply going to come and raise HTTP exception, and this is going to take in a status code. So we're going to use status.http for. So this can be 404 not found because we have searched and not got the specific resource that we are trying to retrieve. And then we can also provide the detail. So the detail in here can be something like, so I'll put this on the next line. So we can come right here and say that our detail is going to be book not found. So I'm going to format this. I'm using the black extension, and now it looks a little bit better. So we are returning our status code right here for not found, as well as the details specifying that the book has not been found. All right, so let us go ahead and try to test that out. So I'm going to head over to RESTFOX right here. I'll create a new request and we're going to call this get a book. So this is going to be one to get a book. Sorry for this. So I guess I'll have to just simply copy paste this. And this is going to be getting a book. So just in case we get /book and then /1, then in this case we are going to get the book with the ID of 1. But in case we get one for, let's say, ID 3, then this is going to return ID 3. Let's say ID 7, that will get the book for ID 7. So I wonder why this is not working. Is our book existing? I think it doesn't exist because our server refreshed. So when we send, because this is a Python list, the moment we load our server, everything will be lost. Now, do not mind about this. We are going to implement a persistent data store in the next video. When we try to create a new book, so let's create one with ID 7. When you try to get that with ID 7, of course, it will go ahead and return that specific book. So our retrieving is also working. Now let us work on the remaining two operations, which are update and delete. So to update a book, we're going to first of all begin by providing data that is coming from our client. So to do that, we're going to need some sort of pedantic model that is going to be one to only send update data. So let's go ahead and create that model. I'm going to start by copying what we have and then creating another model right here. And this model is going to be one that is specific to updating a book. So I'll call this the book update model. And once we've been able to do that, then we'll specify the fields that belong to this model. So I'm going to begin by removing the ID because I'm not going to update that. Then I'm also going to remove the published date, so that we remain with only these 5 fields right here. Now using these fields, we're going to go ahead and update our book. But for us to do that, we shall head over to the endpoint that we use for updating our book. Now I'm notice that I made a mistake right here. Instead of saying patch, I actually made this a GET request. Now let's change that. So I'll say app.patch, and once I've been able to do that, now we shall inject another parameter into this specific function, and that is going to be one for getting that data to update our book. So we shall call this our book update data, and it's going to be of type book update model. So once that is done, now let's go ahead and update this book. So we shall first of all query for it or search for it within our list. So we shall say for book in books, and once we've got our book, actually we need to get our book by using the ID. So we shall check if the book ID is equal to the book ID. Then we are going to go ahead and update these books fields. So for us to do that, we shall do something as simple as book title is going to be equal to book update data dot title, and then we shall do the same thing for the publisher. So this is going to be book update data dot publisher. Let's do the same thing for the book page count. So that is going to be equal to book update data dot page count, and then we shall have book. So this is going to be book publisher, book title, page count, and then language. So I'll change the language, and the language is going to be book update data dot language. Now that we've been able to do this, then we are simply going to go ahead and return the updated book. So we're going to come right here and say return, and we shall return our book. So in case we haven't found the book, then we need to throw an exception. So what I'm going to do is to say raise, and in this case we shall raise an HTTP exception, and we shall specify our status code to be one for not found. So shall say status dot HTTP 400 or 404 not found, and then the detail is going to be for, so our detail in this case is going to be for book not found. Still, we shall look at more ways of handling these errors in the future videos. So we shall just say book not found for now, and when we save, our server is going to restart. So let's go ahead and test this within our RESTbox. So right here in our RESTbox, I'm going to begin by creating a new request, and this request is going to be one for update book. And once I've created the request, now we're going to get the book to update, or the URL for the books to update. So that's going to be similar to one for retrieving a book. I'll change the HTTP method to patch, and then I'll provide the request body. Now if we send, we are going to miss the body. So I'll go ahead and specify that it's going to be JSON. And now let's go ahead and provide the fields. So I'm going to copy what we have here, and then I'll provide it here, but then I'll remove the fields that are not required. So we have the published date and the ID being removed. Now let us go ahead and change this. So I'm going to go ahead and change this from head first HTML, and let's say HTML5 and CSS basics. So then I'll also do the same thing for the author. So let's change the author to John Doe. And once I've been able to do that, I'll send, and this is going to show us that the request has been successful. Now let us go ahead and test this. If we head over back to where we retrieve the book or get the single book, when you try to retrieve this, we now see that our information has been updated. If we go back here and let's say make changes to the author or the publisher of the book, let's say whatever media. Then when we send, it's going to update it. If you try to retrieve it, it's going to retrieve our updated data. So for now, we're remaining with only one HTTP method, and that is the delete method. So to delete a book, we're going to begin by first of all searching for it within our list of books. So we're going to begin by using the same technique that we've used for the previous items. So this is going to be one to get our book. So you shall say something like for books, or for book in books. Then we shall get that specific book if its ID is the ID of the book that we provided within our URL. So this is going to be if book ID is going to be equal to the book ID. Then we are going to go ahead and remove that book from our books list with books.remove. So this shall target that specific book dictionary and remove it from our ID at that specific index it is. And once we have been able to do that, now we shall return an empty dictionary. But this request is not supposed to return anything. So for us to be able to achieve that, we are going to first of all remove what we have right here. And once we've removed that, we've now specified that this request is not going to return a response. And another thing we're going to do is to specify the status code, which is going to be R204 status code for no content. So shall just come right in here and say that the status code is going to be status .http 204 no content. So once we've been able to do this, we also need to raise an error in case the book is not found. So I'm simply going to copy what we have here, and then I'll paste it right here. All right, so now that we are done, let us go ahead and test our endpoint. So right here in my RESTfx, I'm going to begin by simply creating a new request, and I'll call this delete a book. And this is going to be a delete request. And let us try to delete this book with ID of 6. So for now, when we send, we have an error here. Seems like I have provided the wrong URL or something, or the given URL is incorrect or invalid, or the server is not returning correct. So it seems like the server was down, so I have to restart it again. So when I send, now see method not allowed for the requested URL. So the problem is I still have the get request, and yet this is one for deleting a book. Sorry for that. I'll just simply change this from get to delete, and then when I make the request, now we see that it's returning 204 not content. If we try for a book that doesn't exist, we now see book not found. And if we are to confirm whether that book exists, we are now going to go right here and send the request, and now we shall see that the book doesn't exist. And in our long list of 6 books, we now see that that book does not exist. So for now, we have successfully implemented CRUD on our very simple list of book data. And this is just something very simple. So what we can do maybe is to correct or somehow remove some of the repetitions we have within our code. For example, searching for a book, or just in case we have to keep it simple, we can leave this like this and then get to fix this in the next chapter. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and in the next video we shall look at how we can build on top of this and implement the CRUD while using a persistent database, which is PostgreSQL. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video.